Hello, I'm Kara Tessina Allage, Associate Director of Collections and Discovery at the Getty Research Institute. Thank you for joining us. At the Getty, we inspire human connection and mutual understanding through art history and visual culture. The idea of inspiring thought and connection through art history and visual culture is one of the hallmarks of the Johnson Publishing Company archive. The archive presents nearly 75 years of how people of African descent have contributed to our democracy world by raising awareness of the diaspora and celebrating Blackness in its many forms. As we collaborate with our co-steward, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, to enhance accessibility to the Johnson Publishing Company archive, we want to express our gratitude to the Ford, MacArthur, and Mellon Foundations, the Smithsonian Institute, and everyone in partnership with the Getty for their invaluable commitment to preserving the significant collection of American and global history. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Backstage, an unfurling of the Johnson Publishing Company archive, Black Archives in Memory, curated by Getty Managing Archivist Stephen Booth and Public Program Specialist Thisbe Gensler. This is a second presentation of the series. Please join me in welcoming Stephen, who will serve as the moderator for today's presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Allage, for that introduction. And thank you all for tuning in today. It is my pleasure to be here with you to moderate this conversation with two of my favorite colleagues, Savannah Wood, artist and executive director of Afro Charities, and Dorothy Berry, digital curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and author of the forthcoming book, The House Archives Built, and Other Thoughts on Black Archival Possibility, published by We Hear Press. Before we dive into our conversation, I'd like to share a brief history that exemplifies why the work of archiving Black culture and experience is so vital. Work that both of our guests continue to advance in their own groundbreaking ways. Next slide. In 1949, librarian Doris Saunders began what would become one of the most significant collections documenting Black life. At Johnson Publishing Company, she established a special library for staff involved in the company's operations. This included reference books, vertical files of newspaper clippings, and a photo morgue. With support from John H. Johnson, she acquired these resources as well as compiled and organized materials that would serve the editorial needs of publications like Ebony, Jet, Negro Digest, and numerous other titles. Next slide, please. JPC publications weren't merely magazines. They were mirrors reflecting the everyday life of a people that rarely saw themselves represented with dignity and fullness in mainstream media. They were windows into the richness and complexity of the Black experience worldwide. They were a unique and unparalleled record of Blackness imagined by and for Black communities, as articulated by scholar Laura Helton in her seminal work, Scattered and Fugitive Things. And because of this, JPC magazines have become Black cultural touchstones and collector's items still found in homes, bookstores, and online today. Next slide, please. As Johnson Publishing Company grew and its reach extended, so did the work of Saunders and her team, which included her collaborator, Basil Phillips, who joined the company in 1951 and managed the photo files department until his retirement in 2005. Within the photo files, he and his skillfully trained team organized, described, and safeguarded published and unpublished images capturing historically significant events, celebrities, political movements, and those quiet, intimate moments of daily life that, in their accumulation, tell us who we were and who we are. Next slide, please. What Saunders built and Phillips maintained has stood the test of time and is still in existence. The reference books are currently housed at the Stony Island Arts Bank in Chicago. The clipping files are at the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library, and the photo files are co-owned, stewarded, and currently being cataloged and digitized by the Getty Research Institute and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Next slide. The contemporary stewardship of these Johnson Publishing collections are part of a wider renaissance of Black archives that has been taking place in recent years, reminiscent of the work of 20th century collectors like Arturo Schomburg, Dorothy Porter Wesley, and Vivian G. Harsh. Today, there are traditional physical archives and modern digital collections alongside curated social media content, all by and for Black institutions and communities. Additionally, the importance of Black archives and archivists has greater visibility through initiatives like the Getty's Black Visual Arts Archives, Dorothy's forthcoming book, and milestone achievements like the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture's Centennial Celebration. Next slide. However, what we're discussing today goes beyond physical archives or digital collections. We're exploring the intellectual and emotional labor of preservation, the decisions about what matters, what deserves to be kept, and how to build and sustain the infrastructure so they remain accessible across generations. This work happens backstage, often invisible to the public eye, yet it shapes what we collectively remember and forget. Next slide. Both of our guests embody this crucial work. Savannah, whose creative practice and leadership demonstrate how archives can inspire contemporary artistic expression and community engagement. And Dorothy, whose innovative work is helping to make Black archives more accessible and meaningful in the digital age. In a world where history is so often written by those in power, collections like the ones Doris Saunders created stand as acts of self-determination and cultural stewardship. They remind us that the work of memory is never neutral. It is always a statement about what and who we value. And with that, I'd like to open up this conversation to Savannah. Next slide, please. To share your archival origin story, and how did you come to the work that you're currently doing? And were there any influences in your family upbringing or other experiences that led you to this work?
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that introduction, and to everybody here for joining us. It's really an honor to be here. I started with this image because this was really my introduction into archival work. I worked with the artist Theaster Gates in Chicago for about 3 years. And as part of that, you'll see on the left, there's a collection, the Ed J. Williams collection. That was my introduction to archives, period, was cataloging these many objects that were related to racist memorabilia that had been collected over 40 years by a couple that was based in Chicago. And so through that process, I had the opportunity to learn about archival description and how that can either make things surface for researchers or hide objects within a collection. So it showed me how much power exists for somebody who is processing a collection, and how people would be able to find it later. You can go to the next slide. And my second kind of follow-up to that was working with an arts organization in Los Angeles called Clock Shop that was working on a project inspired by Octavia E. Butler's archives, where they invited creative writers and visual artists into her collections to make new work inspired by what they found there. And so in both of those instances, art was really my entry point into archives. And so I've always understood archives to be a basis for creative making, and accessible, or that they should be accessible to all types of people, regardless of their background. So we don't necessarily think about creative artists as scholars all the time, but they can be. And so much of the work that I resonate with does have a really deep historical grounding. And so both of those projects have shaped my framework for what I understand archives to be potentially. So I run my family's newspapers archive. The Afro-American Newspaper Company was founded in 1892 in Baltimore, Maryland. and has been in continuous operation since then. And our collections, similar to the Johnson Publishing Company archives, are, it started as a photo morgue, and now we're turning it into a public research archive, which includes quite a bit of labor that I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment. But we have similar types of collections that are really looking at daily life of people, Black people in America and beyond. And then oftentimes with the captions detailing what they were up to on the back of those images. So it's really rich with information about who we are and who we have been. And in our collections, we have about 3 million of those photos. And so what we're trying to do is to make them more accessible to the public in a variety of ways. You mentioned creative programming as one of those ways. And so, yes, similar to this project with Clock Shop, we have a biannual artist commissioning project that we do, where we invite contemporary artists into the collections to make new work. We do so much programming with an educational and artistic bent to it, which we can talk about a little bit later too. But those are my introductions to archival work.
Thanks, Savannah. Dorothy, same question for you.
Thanks. Next slide. So first, I'd like to say I am really happy to be here with you all today. I apologize in advance for any hesitation in my speech. I've just returned from a really invigorating 2 days at the Who Owns Black Data Symposium, but the vigor is slowly leaching out. As Stephen sent over his initial questions for us in advance, asking about sort of our archival origin story, I thought about narratives that I have often said in print and in other talks. But over the course of those last 2 days with colleagues from across the country and the Caribbean and the UK, I realized how often, regardless of our disciplinary backgrounds, the personal was so key to explaining a relationship to data, in that case, but more broadly to archives. And I ended up having a long conversation with our colleague, Chris Dancy at Pennsylvania, who's just announced as the co-director of the Center for Digital Black Studies, about how when I was growing up, because we're the same, he and I are the same age, when I was growing up, there was a very distinct lane for little girls, and it was Little History Girl. Much like there could be a horse girl today, there was a Little History Girl. And he was not aware of this because he had no sisters. And he didn't, I guess, know many girls or have any male friends who were themselves history girls. So I told him the whole story of Addie Adinka Walker. And I was thinking about all of the books that I had about these historical girls and how they were all based on providing you with primary source information. Every little piece of the books had some sort of pop-ups or footnotes in the back that talked about where this information came from or what the stories were. And that was my favorite part. So in one sense, I think that my relationship to working in archives is really tied to this more broad interest in the past. Like Savannah, although way less, in my personal opinion, proficiently, I have multiple practices. So I currently work as the digital curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a fantastic position, not only because it means I get to work very closely with Stephen on the Johnson Publishing Company archive, since both of our institutions are working hand in hand to preserve and make accessible. But it does mean that I am outside of my comfort zone professionally as an archivist. I'm at a museum for the first time, and they look at things a little bit differently. And archives live only in technical services. So it's giving me opportunities to continue working in my one of my other practices, which is more archival theory and development in that area. Next slide, please. A lot of those theories, I think, go back to the foundations that I grew up with, which were a world of picture books. I was discussing with another colleague something about folk stories last night, and he was saying, based on what you've said, I feel like you have 5 or 6 different scholarly backgrounds, but that's not it. And I was like, no, you get in and you learn a bunch of things. And it made me think about the picture books I had when I was a child and their relationship to archives. Both archives in somewhat more traditional senses, because thinking of Many Thousand Gone, which was very much a history book. But then looking at all these other books and how they represent the oral history archive of both Black folk life, but also Black everyday life. And how my parents, I'm lucky to have them, of course. Well, of course, I am. But how that insistence on making these sorts of things, whether it be all of the Addie books from the library, and eventually with a great deal of saving and budgeting a doll, but definitely the books we could have. And all of these other Black history books sort of really providing a foundational commitment to archives in a roundabout way. I know for a fact my folks would not say that's what they were doing, because I don't distinctly think I could confirm that they know what my job is currently. But this sort of idea of a foundation of an archival origin story, I wanted to take into a different direction than, working in a library in undergraduate school and having graduate assistantships and working at getting a master's of library science and all sorts of other stuff that I have done, but I actually think is less foundational to why I have such a passionate commitment to doing this work today.
Thank you, Dorothy. Savannah, I want to go back to you for a second. Because you mentioned your family's organization. And so, as the executive director of Afro Charities, you're currently navigating the complexities of building a permanent home for the Afro Archives. So I believe that you know the real challenges around infrastructure and fundraising and labor and long-term sustainability. What are some aspects of this work, especially regarding those core resources that are most misunderstood or invisible to outsiders? And then I do have a follow-up, but I want to get your feedback on that first part first.
Oh, there's so much. There's so much in that. Because of course and we talk about this on our tiny little team all the time. There are 7 of us, and it is not enough people to do the amount of work that we're doing right now. So I think everybody on my team is feeling that strain right now. So there's just the archival management is one piece, taking care of the collections. That's just one part.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier the work that we're doing of turning this photo morgue that was used internally as a production archive for the Afro newspaper company into a public resource for research, right? A public research archive. That's a huge undertaking. I mentioned 3 million photographs. It's the selection of boxes that we're working with now are about 1,200 linear feet. That our small team of 3 is working on processing right now. And there's just like everyday little human things that come up. There's paper cuts, there's like uncomfortable chairs, there's eye strain, there's like the actual physical labor that is affecting people's bodies and their ability to do this work 5 days a week. So we had to adjust it and make it 4 days a week. There's things like that are just, practically your brain can't take all of that information all the time. So you have to have something else, another outlet, in order to kind of come back to the work fresh and renewed. So there's so many levels to it. And then for me, on top of all of that, we decided we're going to build a public research center, which I am proud to say we've raised 15 million of the required $16 million to get this up and running. So we broke ground on this project in February of this year, and it is anticipated to be open by the end of next year. And then comes the work of, as you mentioned, maintaining it and, preserving it long term. And so then I always have to kind of remind myself to pause and celebrate, because
Yeah.
I'm already thinking about how do we endow this site so that we don't have to, beg for dollars every year to make sure that it continues to run, and to make sure that we can grow our team appropriately to fill the space and to care for the people who are coming through here. But it's a big undertaking, and I've just started this work 6 years ago. So this is a lot to have happened within a 6-year time frame. And when you talk about things happening behind the scenes or backstage, so much of that happened during the lockdown during COVID. And so it really has been behind the scenes. And now we're stepping into a new era where it will be very, very public. And our goal with that is also to just introduce people to the labor that I described earlier, the work that our archivists are doing behind the scenes, so that they have a sense of, the lives that are being poured into this to make this information accessible. I think there's always this desire to see everything digitized, to have everything at your fingertips, and it just doesn't happen without people doing that work. And so for people to be able to recognize that, to see the labor, will be really important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Savannah, so based on your insight, how can we, the public, better support efforts at organizations like yours that are facing and doing similar work?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think everybody has seen recently is that in terms of what used to be kind of stable sources of funding at the federal level in particular are no longer that. And we see in the archives all of these really innovative ways that people supported organizations, whether it was like these very grassroots campaigns where everybody just gave $1, but if everybody actually gave $1, then it would
Yeah,
work,
yeah.
And I want to highlight the Black school in New Orleans. They have a campaign called We Fund Us that's going right now, where it's a $10 a month contribution that they're requesting of people, just as a form of sustainability. You get certain perks for that donation, but it's just, most of us can do $10 a month,
Right, right, right.
or rather a lot of us can. And if you can't, you can maybe do 5, maybe you
Yeah,
can do 1, maybe you can do 2, but all of that does add up if there are actually that many, several people doing it.
yeah. Thanks for that.
Mhm.
Dorothy, I want to go back to you for a bit, because you talked a little bit about your many disciplinary tracks. I know you as an archivist, and you're also a curator with a primary focus on Black digital collections. And so I'm curious to know how you determine the appropriate balance between highlighting like major historical narratives versus showcasing the everyday aspects of the Black experience that might be otherwise overlooked. And I know this is a conversation that we've had behind the scenes as it relates to the JPC archive. And so, how does designing for online access and thinking about user engagement kind of influence your curatorial approach?
No, it's a really great question, especially around the Johnson Publishing Company archive, because as you stated in your amazing introduction, um, there are iconic images. There are soon to be iconic images of, famous figures, but maybe that photo was never presented in that way. But, once people see it, it will be another standard.
Right.
And there is a definite value in imagery like that, value across multiple axes. There is sort of the intuitive, just it's cool to see things that you like. It's cool to
Hmm.
see celebrities or things that bring up memories for folks. Um, they are also on a more practical or strategic level. There are benefits in being able to use images that are recognizable in terms of getting people's enhanced interest in collections. Um, I would say in my personal curatorial practice, however, I lean more towards images of everyday life because I think that they are the images people are least likely to have seen. And when I talk with folks outside of, historian or cultural heritage contexts, there are a lot of misconceptions about Black life in increasingly recent times. It used to be sort of, I don't know a lot about 1900s. Well, that's fair. But now even so, you get, the 1950s, who knows what anybody was up to other than there was Martin Luther King. but there was a lot of things happening. And I think that the affective possibilities around showing the complexity of everyday life and letting people feel that human connection to the past is really important. It's important for communities represented in images to see themselves in the past. It's also important for people in different demographic groups to get a full understanding of richness of people's lives. And also that helps build a solidarity with the past, which then leads forward to the future. Because when you see, a dad with a little baby and he's looking at that baby like that's the most important thing in the world, that photo will have resonance if it is from 1890 or 1990 or 1947. And it's really easy for everyone, I was going to say if you're not a historian, but honestly, it's really easy for everyone to look at various periods in the past and be like, well, there was no time for smiling at your baby because everyone was so busy suffering. And then not to downplay the realities of oppression, but also those everyday images, I think, are what make the more important events or iconic images actually relevant. You're not a celebrity if you don't have a lot of fans. And how can I contextualize that celebrity without knowing there are a lot of fans? And that's one of, I think, the most compelling things in the Johnson Publishing Company archive is how much imagery there are of everyday events. And I assume in very similar ways, and maybe even more specific ways, this is similar in the Afro collection. Because when you're a newspaper, you're covering major events, but you're also covering church fish fries and debutante balls in town. And that combination of things is what comes together to let you know, yeah, this protest was happening. And at the same time, some people in Baltimore were raising some money at church to send to that protest. Some people were not liking the protest. They had different opinions. And some people were enrolling their kids in elementary school starting the week of September 7th. All of those things come together to create, the historical record. And so I think especially with digital access where there's so much repetition of imagery and so much imagery is made available primarily in a licensing and financial benefit based way. Institutions that can afford to make images openly available have a really unique opportunity to offer not just images people have seen before, but maybe now you can download it, but really to open up a different way of thinking. And then that I think also just loops back to what Savannah's saying about, which is so relevant for artists of all sorts as well. One of the things last portions of this answer at this symposium I was at, one of the attendees was getting her MFA in costume design. And she was saying, that she had started looking in archives to look at images from the past. She's designing costumes around Black history and Black aesthetics. And my first thought, which, I mean, to be fair, with the amount of work we're doing on it, almost always my first thought is Johnson Publishing Company archive on any topic these days. But that's kind of that thinking of, well, she could look at celebrities and that will tell you a certain thing, but it won't tell you what someone wore at home that wasn't rich.
Yeah, I mean, it's so real. One of the main programs that we do also is just archival reference. So we get inquiries from all kinds of people in all kinds of fields, and we have a full-time role that is literally just fielding those requests because we don't have a public access point for people to come into the collections. What we do have, though, are some digital materials, which are really helpful. And one of the best tools I find is ProQuest, actually, where most of our actual newspapers are scanned from 1893 until basically the present. And as Dorothy was saying, it's like the context becomes so clear there. You can look at a page of a newspaper and you see everything that's happening that day or that week all there. You can flip through each page and you see, the birthday party that's written up. You see the March on Washington, which is like, 3 pages in the paper because they did that kind of thing every now and then, or they just really gave up a lot of real estate there for things that mattered. But you also see what matters to the institution itself, and what causes that they're highlighting and supporting. What goes on the front page to sell papers versus, the other information that people need to have. So it's really fascinating to see. But and to the costuming point, we worked with Baltimore School for the Arts, which is my alma mater. They have a historic program that they do every year with their costuming students where they do a historical project, and they do research with the Afro archives and several other archives in Baltimore and Maryland to back up their designs. So it's just the uses are limitless, in my opinion. And so the more access that we can provide, the richer our cultural milieu will be. Everybody will have a better sense of like where we've been, where we're going. And similarly, like, yeah, the intimacy with history, I think, is really important for just understanding where we've come from.
I'm curious to know, Savannah and Dorothy. Savannah, what's your favorite item that you've come across in the Afro? And then Dorothy, your favorite photograph that you've seen so far?
Our archives assistant, Oyenda Omoloja, found this really beautiful, small, what looks like to be a cyanotype of my great-great-grandmother and her husband, their child, and probably their grandchild out on this piece of land, which I am making an assumption here, may have been the land that her family owned in Montgomery County where they had formerly been enslaved. And if it is that land, there's a really interesting history there, where she sold a portion of it to her brother in order to fund the Afro. So seeing this image of them like in a country landscape was stunning, and it was just them at leisure.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That one's a little tough for me because, as I'm always saying, with this collection, my favorite image is often whichever image I looked at last. I think that the interest and excitement around these things can almost not be overstated. So, as Savannah was talking, I thought, let me open up one of the folders I have and just see what photo opens up. And I bet it's one of my faves, and that's true. Let's see. Can I see? Is this working? Can folks see this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great folder, and it's a little hot outside today. It's pretty nice, but it's getting there for DC. I mean, it's ramping up for DC. And what's great is there's a folder of Colorama Park, which is in Northwest, which is a part of DC I live in. And I don't know what the event was, and maybe it was about the park's opening, or maybe it was just about the people that come to the park, but it's a series of images of Black, white, Asian families, children doing all sorts of playing. There are obviously kids having fun in a sprinkler because it gets so hot here. And there are kids playing basketball. There's someone introducing a little kid to a dog, and the kid looks a little scared. And that is something that, as I came back from the train station, I could have passed this image in real life today. And that's, for me, I'm not necessarily sentimental around things like that, but there's something very sweet when you see things like that you have that immediate, oh yeah, I walk by that place instinct. And then I'm going to throw a second one out there to even escalate. I feel like, you had a very personal one, Savannah. Now I'm escalating my pure silliness. There's also a folder that is called like dog, talking Ohio. And it's a series of images that's clearly about, no, it's smartest dog, but it's clearly about someone's dog that they thought was really smart. And all of the photos are like this man in his den and his dog with an open dictionary in front of it. Or his dog has a little pipe in his mouth and also is next to a dictionary. And there's so many photos in this folder, like 40. And it's something very fun to imagine the photo shoot of that day, because sometimes we have folders for really important events or major figures, and there's maybe one or two or three photos from that shoot. But whoever this guy was and his dog, who was so smart, they went to town making sure we had all angles.
Nice.
And I do enjoy that one a lot.
Nice, nice. It's interesting because you never know what you're going to come across in the JPC archive. And I remember when I first started, I opened up a folder and it was an X-ray. And after examining the X-ray and doing a little bit of research, come to find out it was Muhammad Ali's head X-ray. Why it's in the collection, no one can answer that. But we have it. It's just, interesting to think about how, and I'm sure the same is similar for the Afro Savannah, that whatever they could use to tell the story, they used those materials,
Absolutely.
and they kept them. And so it's nice to have a record of that, to help answer some of those questions that, you might have about this particular item.
Mhm.
Let's see. We have a couple questions from the audience, quite a few. So we'll start with those, and then I have one final question for you all. Let's see. The first one is for Savannah. Does the Afro have support partners for the long term in the archiving effort? What went into your organization's deliberation to set up an Afro archive versus working with an established institution which has archive management as part of their work?
Yeah, I mean the Afro has been maintaining its own collections for 130 years, basically. So there is a process for it. It's not in a standard archival sense, but it has been happening. And I think there's a deep sense of pride about that, to have it be owned and operated by the same institution for all that time. So that's part of it. We've also seen that in some cases, you see collections go to more established like research institutions that have a program for archiving already. And
Mhm.
oftentimes they won't actually get around to processing it in a timeline that viewers might demand. So it's a priority for us. And we have people on our team who are trained in doing that work, and we are training people in doing that work, which is also part of the legacy of the Black press, which is to train up the next generation. And so we're continuing in that legacy. But in terms of partnerships, we are certainly open to them. And we're looking for, once we move into our new space, to partner with all of the several universities that are in Baltimore, to have internship programs, to have fellowship programs on site. And so that will certainly be part of the future of the organization at the Upton Mansion.
All right, our next one. I would love to know how archivists would advise academics on archives that they encounter that are not housed at a library or institution and is rather in the garage of a church parishioner or in the back rooms of church closets. These are the archives I work with and have often wondered what the next step should be once I process the archive for my work, but the materials are still located in these places.
I mean, I think for me, the next step or the first step would be asking the folks who have those materials what they would like done with them. Um, Not assuming anybody knows that, but sort of thinking through, well, you can keep things in your garage and then you have access to them all the time. Like kind of Savannah's point, if you donate them somewhere, you might not get to see them for a while. You could donate them to an institution. But I kind of think sometimes we can get a little too tied down to the idea that material has to be preserved in a structured institutional way.
Mhm.
Uh, Depending on the nature of the material, I have hundreds of family photos from the 1900s through the 1950s, and I have no plans to put them in a museum or archive. Um, my plans would be to share them with other people in my family and hopefully with new generations in my family. And it's easier for me to do that if I can go grab a box. And so I think that I don't know, I'm very personally comfortable with the concepts of impermanence. And I think it's, yeah, certain degree, it's okay to say, keep them in the garage. And yeah, some of them might get lost. Or if you think everyone, this is so rare and unique that this has to be preserved generationally, maybe talk to the people, but it's really the owners of the materials are the real say makers in that scenario to me.
My only thing would be keep them dry if you can.
Yeah.
Do your best to keep them dry.
Absolutely.
I mean, to be fair, I'm
Yeah.
not saying if you go in there and you're just resting old pizza boxes on top of your photo. You know, I'm not saying don't do a little advising if somebody does say they want to keep it at home. But
Yeah, I mean, there's some like mitigation factors that people can build in. There's also some partnerships you might be able to strike up with organizations in your town, in your city, wherever, where maybe they can provide you with some materials where you can just store them better within your own home, or maybe they can help. Oh my God, somebody's honking like crazy. I hope you couldn't hear it. Okay. Or, maybe they can help digitize some of the materials for you. Maybe there's a place that has a program for it. There's a lot of possibilities. For instance, in Maryland, the Enoch Pratt Library has a program called Digital Maryland, where they do digitization days on a regular basis. And so you could have a backup copy. It won't be the same as the physical thing, obviously, but you have something. But I tend to agree with you also, Dorothy. Like I'm not so focused on the institutionalization of these objects. It's like, had them for all this time. You've cared for them for all this time. If you have desire to do something different with it, then pursue it,
Yeah. All right, our next question. Dorothy, you spoke about children's books, which I love as a children's librarian. And Savannah, you spoke about the importance of accessibility. Could both of you tell me how you're currently, I'm sorry, could both of you tell me how you currently are imagining how to make archives accessible for young Black folks?
yeah, I have a project that I did a couple of years ago that I hope to be able to. I mean, luckily, currently at working at National African American Museum, we have an astounding and award-winning education team. So a part of me almost feels like any idea or thing I did in the past is irrelevant because they probably know how to do it a million times more spectacularly. But a few years ago, I was working at Harvard University at their large rare books and manuscripts library, and traditionally and historically, that library has felt for a lot of folks as a sort of inaccessible, lofty place, not just for children, but for adults, for people at the university for various reasons. And as digitizing a large collection of materials about African American history and culture, and something that was really important to me was showing and providing the resources, but that showing that collections like this can be made accessible for really advanced computational style research, but also for a middle grade setting. So I was able to get a small internal grant and worked with a colleague who had been consulting with Boston Public Schools around their Black history curriculum to develop a unit around one of the collections we were digitizing. A lot of the collections were either the content would require such a high reading level, maybe because it's like a 19th century book, or the amount of contextualization that would be needed for something to make sense, or not be sort of distinctly traumatizing to children was probably more than a single unit or lesson activity could do. So we looked at a collection that was family records from around the Richmond, Virginia area in the 1870s through 1890s. And working with my colleague, we developed what she was calling a autoethnography project, where the students got to look through this collection. We had questions about materials that were designed either for a student by themselves or with a parent, because it was during lockdown still. So we're thinking maybe they're at home or in a classroom. Questions about things like, here is a student's attendance award from 1888. Why do you think they kept this? Do you have any, like, have you ever seen an award at home? Um, what do you think it meant to them to be able to attend school when they maybe hadn't been allowed to attend school? Or maybe when their parents hadn't been allowed to attend school? That sort of questioning, and then even perhaps a little less historical, just on the like, here's a picture of a family. Do you have a picture of anyone important to you at home? Why do you keep those pictures? And so then the little project around it was that students would go home and look at imagery or create new imagery if they didn't have any that sort of memorialized their idea of family or of what they would want to pass on. So that was a really great exercise, I think, around getting materials that we would have probably said before are not a children's collection made more accessible. And I think another thing, a way that we approached that was part of her work was giving us some information about the demographics of Cambridge and Boston public schools and looking at the collections through that lens. So in Boston and Cambridge, most of the African diasporic students are of Latino or Caribbean heritage. So we did have a separate thing that called out the collections that were related to those specific ethnic backgrounds, but also talking about how most of those collections were slavery records and were slavery records from 18th to early 19th century. So, if students ask about their own heritage, we have things, but not only are they bare minimum not affirming, but they're also in old government language. So I think it's a mixture of providing ways for students, and especially younger students, to engage with the past, but also working to provide educators with tools to help them guide that work in the way that they know makes most sense for the students or children they work with.
We have a lot of different ways that we work with young people. One of the ones that I love to highlight is our partnership with a youth-centered organization in Baltimore called Muse 360. And they do an annual program called the New Generation Scholars, and they've added on a part that's a Young Artist Archival Fellowship. And we've been in partnership with them for the past 3 years, and those young people spend time with us in the collections and then make new creative work inspired by their research there. And the Afro Archives definitely document world history through the Afro's lens, so it's not just Baltimore, but there is a really deep connection to Baltimore. And so for young people who are located in this city, many times they can even find their own families within the collection. And so that's been a really remarkable experience for them to go searching for their families and to be able to find them there. And if not their families, they can find their high school. They can find any number of things that are in the collection. In addition to that, one of our main focuses as an organization is to find ways to bring what we call non-traditional scholars into the collection. So just everyday people who have a curiosity about history, or maybe don't even know that they're curious about history yet. We want to just make sure that people know that this is here for them. And so we do all kinds of stuff. Like we'll be at Artscape, which is a big arts festival, outdoor public festival in Baltimore for 2 days. And we'll bring political cartoons that this artist Thomas Stockett made for 40 years. We'll reprint some of those with captions about who's featured there and have them as coloring pages. So you can engage with the collection in so many different ways. And we're always trying to think up ways that folks can just touch the collection, see it, understand what might be in there, and just have it in their head that the Afro probably has something if they're looking for it.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And then our last questions from the audience. With a lot of funding and resources being cut from institutions that do this type of work, how would you recommend someone who's new make it in this field? Are there any particular skills we should look into specifically around tech?
This is always the most difficult question for me. Even when summer was here and the living was easy, it's really difficult to figure out how to make your way in cultural heritage writ large. The two things I often advise folks entering into archives are, well, there's really three things. One of which is to not put all of your identity into the work. Because institutions won't love you back. And so it can be really difficult. And yes, Stephen can be laughing because he knows how like insanely engaged I am. But that can be hard because there's a lot of rejection in job hunting. And there's a lot, and a lot of the ways that folks used to sort of get a foothold in, in the door were through funded grant positions that probably won't be happening very often for the next little while.
Mhm.
In terms of specific technology, I think if that's an area that you have interest and strengths in, pursue more of that. I've always said and feel strongly that even as someone whose job titles always have the word digital in it, um, you need to know enough to be able to talk to developers and to understand what they're saying to you in a broad strokes. You don't necessarily have to know how to do all of the work that they do. And I think that's reciprocal. In the best case scenario, technologists would know how archives work, what their structures are, what the content they're working with, but they don't have to be deep in the weeds. And text moves so fast is the other thing. You could spend a lot of time getting a certain type of coding done, and then all of a sudden we don't use it anymore. Um, and then the third, and I do think most important thing, and sometimes most difficult thing, I advise to folks trying to break into fields, cultural heritage archives, is to make real efforts to be as outgoing as you can be with your own personality. And regardless of how outgoing you can be, really try to be kind to everybody,
Mhm.
especially if you start getting positions and there are people at any point that are below you. When you're starting off, it's kind of hard to be not nice to people that are below you on the ladder because maybe you are the last rung. But so many opportunities I've had professionally came from someone recommending me when I wasn't in the room. And that only happens really when someone remembers you in a positive way. And a lot of times, in my experience, positive remembrances of folks professionally, they have the foundation in the work. You're probably not going to recommend somebody who doesn't know how to do what you're recommending them for. But it has to do with the way you interacted with people. And I think of the first time I ever gave a keynote, which really put a different trajectory on my career. And that was because they asked our colleague Stacey Williams to do the keynote, and she was too busy. But she said, "You should talk to Dorothy Berry." And they said, "Who's that?" And she was like, "Just you talk to her." And that I think there's a lot of that in the world
Mhm.
in terms of jobs. And I know that sometimes that can be disheartening because you're like, well, what if I just don't meet the right people or that sort of thing? But I think it's bigger than that because you also don't know who the right people are. You also don't know if one day you become the right people. So I guess that's sort of more philosophical advice than anything concrete, but feels very hard to make concrete statements these days.
I don't have anything to add. Your number 3 was what I was going to say.
Yeah, 1, 2, and 3 for me. All right, so we are at the end of our event, but I wanted to close with one final question to the both of you. Y'all are experts in Black archives and cultural heritage preservation, and you could be doing many things. Matter of fact, you do many things. But what keeps you motivated to do this work? And I'm also curious to know, have you given any thought about your own legacy and your own archive?
Hmm. Okay, you were just talking. I'll go first. I have an ancestral mandate to do this work, so I can't let them down. So that is the motivating factor. That's it. Um, and I do a lot of other things at the same time, which is crazy because this takes up so much time already. But I do it because like Dorothy mentioned earlier, you can't put your entire self into the institution. And so I'm trying to maintain a little part for myself outside of it also. So that's where my art practice comes in. Um, and then in terms of long-term legacy, I just, once this building is up and open, I feel like I did it. It's like, that's it. I don't owe y'all anything else. So check. But I keep I journal. I keep a journal, and I'm gonna be one of those people in a box where it's like, don't open this until 20 to 2,300.
Oh no.
So yeah, I'm putting some limits on it. That's all I got.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I could steal ancestral mandate because that's a cool term.
It really is.
And I
Thank you,
do
Savannah.
Take it.
dad was was a vernacular, folk historian
Mm.
and a definite collector of things. But I do feel like going back to this childhood um, foundations, I have just always been really, really interested in the past. And I think part of what makes me passionate in continuing the work is a feeling of connection and desire to promote respect for people who have passed on.
Mhm.
I often get really up in arms about archival subjects and like making sure we treat them as fully realized people. So there's probably something really cool and cosmological about why I make these connections, but I don't know. And then my legacy, I'm the opposite. I throw away journals. I think it's from working in archives too. I've seen people look through journals and letters and laugh. Don't you get to see my shame, everybody? Um, but I do think sometimes about things I have that are historical or of value. And I have some small children in my life that I think they're probably, if I don't have a small child of my own by the time that people need to take things, or a large child, maybe I'll get to live long. But I have some inheritors in mind.
Okay. Okay. Nice. Um, Savannah, Dorothy, thank you all for this inspiring, thoughtful, and brilliant conversation. Y'all are truly the best at what you do, and I'm so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedules to come and share with us today. I'd also like to thank Ann Saunders for so graciously providing me with insight about her mother, Doris Saunders, and her mother's work at JPC. Your support has been tremendous throughout this entire process. Um, to our audience, thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate you all being here, and we're sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions. But please, for more information about the JPC Archive Project, please visit our resource guide, which was provided in the chat, or at getty.edu. And be on the lookout for the next Backstage program in November, which will celebrate Ebony's anniversary, and it will be moderated by archivist Skylar Hearn. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Yeah.